My parents said Grandma won't live here much longer, Emma whispered, her small hand gripping mine tightly under the birthday table. That moment, I froze. The balloons, the cake, the laughter, everything blurred. I'd spent my whole life raising that boy, my son Ethan, supporting his wife Samantha, pouring my soul into this family. And now, they were planning to erase me. But I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I smiled. Because if they thought I was too old to fight back, they'd forgotten who built this family brick by brick. They saw a tired old woman. I saw an opportunity. The next 72 hours would change everything. I would lose nothing except the illusion that I was loved, and I'd take back everything they tried to steal. So stay with me. Because what they didn't know was, you should never underestimate a grandmother with nothing left to lose. The kettle whistled, a lonely sound in the quiet kitchen. Martha Collins, 68, poured the hot water over a tea bag with practiced grace, her hands slightly trembling from arthritis, but still firm enough to manage every little chore around the house. Her house. Once filled with laughter, midnight baby cries, the smell of Sunday roasts, now filled only with the echo of her own footsteps and the occasional creak of aging wood. She lowered herself into the chair by the window, the one with the best morning light, and stared at the faint marks on the wall. Tiny pencil lines from years ago still remained, measuring Ethan's height as he grew from toddler to boy to man. She never scrubbed them off. It felt like erasing history. Martha sipped her tea and let her thoughts drift. Her entire life had been made of choices that no one quite noticed. She gave up her scholarship to care for her ailing mother. Later, she quit her administrative job to raise Ethan when his father, Tom, took a second job to support the family. When Tom was diagnosed with Parkinson's, she became his full-time caregiver for 7 grueling, heartbreaking years. And then, when he passed away, she thought perhaps she'd rest. Instead, Ethan's life collapsed into chaos, layoffs, debt, a second mortgage. Martha stepped in again, watching Emma after school, covering bills, wiring money, just until they got through the rough patch. That rough patch, it turned out, had no expiration date. She never complained. It wasn't in her nature. She just kept going, because that's what mothers did. The front doorbell rang, a sudden jolt in the stillness. She rose, slowly, knees stiff, and opened the door to find her neighbor, Dolores Marks, standing there with a loaf of banana bread and a knowing smile. "Mornin', Martha. Thought you could use something sweet with that bitter tea you always drink." Martha chuckled softly. "You always know when I need something. Come in." They sat together at the table, the banana bread still warm. Dolores had been her neighbor for over 20 years, through birthday parties and funerals, snowstorms, and spring planting. Martha trusted few people like she did Dolores. "So I ran into Ethan downtown on Tuesday," Dolores said casually, reaching for her second slice. "He and Samantha were leaving First Metro Bank. Looked like they had a stack of papers." Martha blinked. "Papers?" "Big stack, envelopes and all. He said something about estate stuff, but I didn't press. He looked busy." Dolores shrugged, unconcerned. But Martha wasn't. Estate stuff? Why would Ethan be discussing anything about estates? And why at the bank? She hadn't asked him to help with her finances, never had. And Samantha? That woman wouldn't lift a finger unless it directly benefited her. Something didn't feel right. "Maybe they're refinancing their house," Martha offered, forcing a small smile. Dolores tilted her head, curious. "Well, maybe. But Ethan said something odd. We'll finally have everything in place soon." That's what he told the teller. "You know how I remember details." Martha's heart skipped. Everything in place. That phrase echoed louder than she wanted it to. It wasn't just casual banking language, it sounded planned, prepared. She nodded absently as Dolores chatted on about her new tomatoes, but her mind was a million miles away. After Dolores left, Martha stood by the sink staring into her cup of cold tea. A sudden chill ran through her, not from the weather, but from a creeping sense of something unspoken. She didn't want to jump to conclusions. Ethan was her son, her only child. He wouldn't... Would he? But her gut whispered something different, something instinctive. People don't get secretive at banks unless they're hiding something. She walked slowly through the house, touching the back of the worn armchair where Tom used to sit, pausing at the photo of their wedding day framed in brass. She whispered to the air as if Tom could still hear her. "Did we do too much for him, love? Did we make him weak by giving too much?" No answer came, of course, only the hum of the refrigerator. Martha returned to her chair by the window and watched a young mother walk past with a stroller, her toddler giggling. She felt an ache deep inside, both joy and sorrow. She remembered holding Ethan's hand that way, once, long ago. Now she wasn't sure what Ethan was holding behind his back. The phone rang just after breakfast the next day. Martha hesitated before answering. Caller ID, Ethan. She picked up, pressing the receiver close. "Hello? Mom?" Ethan's voice cracked slightly. "Hey, how are you feeling?" "Fine," she replied cautiously. "Why?" "Oh, no reason. Just checking in." A pause. She could hear him breathing, the faint sounds of movement in the background. Drawers opening, something tapping against wood. "Listen, we were hoping you'd come to Emma's birthday this weekend. Of course, I wouldn't miss it." "No, I mean, earlier than usual, like around noon. The party's at 2, but Samantha and I wanted to, talk. Privately." Martha frowned. "Talk about what?" "Just future stuff, family plans, nothing bad, Mem," he added too quickly. "Just things we need to think about together. Samantha has some ideas about, your living situation, making life easier for you." "My living situation? Is something wrong with my house?" she asked, voice sharper than intended. No, Ethan rushed. "Not at all. We just think it might be time to talk about what comes next, that's all." Martha didn't respond immediately. The silence on the line stretched uncomfortably. "Okay," she finally said slowly. "I'll come at noon." "Great, that's great. Thanks, Mom. You'll see. It's all about making sure you're taken care of." He hung up before she could ask anything else. The phone still warm in her hand, Martha stood at the window again, her tea cooling beside her. Something about Ethan's tone, too eager, too practiced, made her stomach twist. And Samantha's ideas? That woman barely disguised her irritation any time Martha voiced an opinion. She turned to her laptop, instinct pulling her to open her email. Not much came through these days beyond spam and retirement newsletters. But one message caught her eye. Subject line, secret. It was from Emma. Martha's heart skipped. She clicked it open, eyes scanning quickly. It was short. "Grandma, I'm writing from school. I'm not supposed to email you, but I wanted to warn you. Mommy said you won't live with us much longer. She told Daddy it's almost done. Please be careful. Don't tell them I told you." Emma Martha's hands trembled slightly as she reread the message. "Not supposed to email. It's almost done. Be careful." Her chest tightened. She hadn't imagined it. Something was happening. Emma, sweet, observant Emma, had picked up on it and despite being just a child, had the courage to reach out. How much had Samantha said in front of that little girl? How much did Emma understand? Martha's mind began spinning. If Samantha and Ethan were planning something that wouldn't let her live with them much longer, then it wasn't just about moving in or casual suggestions about retirement living. This was calculated, prepared, probably legal. The bank papers, the early invitation, the push to talk privately. She stood and moved to her desk, opening the drawer where she kept her documents. Property deeds, tax returns, insurance policies, all carefully organized but vulnerable. She thought of the conversation with Dolores again. What had they really signed at the bank? The room felt colder now. Or maybe that was just her bones reacting to the betrayal creeping into her awareness. She sat back down, rereading Emma's message one more time before deleting it. Emma had taken a risk, and Martha wouldn't let her suffer for it. Still, it cut deeper than anything to think her granddaughter felt the need to warn her about her own parents. She remembered when Emma was born, how Samantha had refused to let her hold the baby in the hospital because we don't want too many people touching her. She'd told herself it was just new mother nerves. Now she wondered if it had always been more than that. Had Samantha seen her as competition from the start? A voice of reason Ethan might listen to? Or just a bank account with feelings? Martha closed her eyes, breathing slowly. She'd spent her whole life giving, quietly, without keeping score. She had never expected thanks, but she had believed in love. Now she wasn't so sure. The silence in the house didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt watchful, like something was about to end. Or maybe something was about to begin. The driveway was crowded with unfamiliar cars when Martha arrived. Colorful balloons were tied to the mailbox, and the smell of grilled chicken wafted from the backyard. A happy 10th birthday, Emma banner stretched across the porch, flanked by 2 oversized cartoon unicorns. It was excessive, too excessive. Martha parked slowly, gripping the steering wheel for a few extra seconds before stepping out. Her instincts weren't wrong often, and today they screamed. Still, she straightened her blouse, fixed a smile on her face, and approached the front door. Samantha opened it before she knocked. "Oh, Martha, you made it," she chirped, leaning in for an awkward side hug. "You look wonderful, so vibrant." Martha blinked. Vibrant? Samantha usually greeted her with a curt nod and moved on to more important guests. "Thank you," she replied, stepping inside. "Everything looks very festive." The living room had been transformed. Streamers draped every corner, a hired magician was setting up near the fireplace, and a cotton candy machine hummed quietly near the back window. She'd never seen a birthday party this lavish for Emma, or anyone. Ethan emerged from the kitchen, his smile too wide to be real. "Mom!" he boomed, enveloping her in a hug. "We're so glad you came early. Emma's going to flip when she sees you." "I wouldn't miss it," Martha said softly, pulling back to study his face. His eyes darted quickly, avoiding her gaze. "Come on," Ethan said. "Let's get you settled. Samantha made a special seat for you out back, right in the shade, perfect view of everything." Before she could respond, Samantha reappeared with a tall glass of lemonade already in hand. "Fresh squeezed. Just for you, Martha. We remembered how you like it." Martha took the glass but didn't drink. Samantha never remembered how she liked anything. Out on the patio, folding chairs had been arranged like a mini auditorium. Martha's chair, fluffed with a cushion and covered in a floral throw, sat in the center like a throne. "Wow," she murmured. "Oh, it's nothing," Samantha said, laughing. "Only the best for Emma's grandma. She deserves to feel special." Martha gave a tight smile and sat. For the next 20 minutes, the party unfolded in what felt like choreographed choreography. Samantha floated between guests, overly gracious. Ethan made a point of telling everyone how much Martha had done for the family, often too loudly. Emma hadn't arrived yet, likely being dressed for a surprise entrance. A woman approached, mid-30s, tight curls, expensive sunglasses perched on her head. "You must be Martha," she said warmly, sitting beside her without invitation. "I'm Taylor. Samantha talks about you all the time." "Oh?" Taylor laughed, sipping from her wine glass. "She says you're a total saint. All that support you've given them, financial, emotional, everything. Honestly, I don't know how she could have gotten through the last few years without you." Martha's spine stiffened slightly. "She says things are finally turning around," Taylor went on, dropping her voice. "With that big transfer happening soon, it's like, boom, fresh start." "Transfer?" Martha asked, keeping her voice even. "Oh," Taylor blinked. "Maybe I wasn't supposed to say that, just something Samantha mentioned. Sounds like they're getting everything in place. New paperwork, legal stuff, grown-up boring stuff." Martha nodded slowly. "Right, grown-up stuff." Taylor was already distracted, waving at someone else and standing. "Lovely meeting you." Martha sat in silence for a moment. Her eyes drifted toward the kitchen window, where she caught a glimpse of Samantha talking animatedly to Ethan. They both laughed, but there was a tension in their shoulders, a shared secret. The lemonade in her hand warmed with the sun. She still hadn't taken a sip, Her ears caught fragments of other conversations. Guests asking about the decorations, someone joking about Samantha finally getting her dream kitchen, Ethan promising, "Everything's under control now." She couldn't shake the feeling that she was the only one at this party who didn't know what was really being celebrated. Was it really Emma's birthday? Or was it something else? She spotted Emma being ushered into the yard from the side of the house, dressed in a frilly dress that was far too much for a backyard gathering. The guests clapped. Cameras flashed. Ethan called out for everyone's attention. Martha clapped too. But she was watching Emma's eyes. The little girl smiled, but it didn't quite reach her face. The laughter of children blended with the sound of balloons popping and upbeat music trickling from outdoor speakers. Martha sat quietly under the shade canopy, her lemonade untouched, eyes subtly scanning the yard. Emma had returned to the crowd, seemingly glowing in the attention of her friends, but her gaze kept drifting back to her grandmother. There was a shadow in the child's expression, a flicker of something more mature than a 10-year-old should carry. Martha recognized it instantly, the look of someone carrying a secret too heavy for their age. 10 minutes later, as the magician wrapped up his routine and the guests drifted toward the dessert table, Emma appeared beside Martha's chair like a small shadow. She tugged gently on her grandmother's sleeve. "Grandma, can we go see the garden? I want to show you the new sunflowers Daddy planted." Martha smiled gently and nodded, standing slowly. "Of course, sweetheart." They walked around the side of the house, behind the garage, toward the small vegetable and flower garden. The noise of the party dulled behind them. Once out of sight, Emma reached for Martha's hand, gripping it tighter than usual. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling, "Mommy and Daddy said something really weird last night. I wasn't supposed to hear it." Martha crouched slightly, placing her hand on Emma's shoulder. "What did they say, baby?" "They were in the kitchen. I was supposed to be asleep, but I wanted water. And I heard Mommy say you were going to sign some papers soon because you're getting forgetful and old people shouldn't worry about big decisions anymore." Martha's chest tightened. "Daddy didn't say much, but Mommy kept saying stuff like, 'It's all arranged. Once she signs, we'll move her to Oak Ridge and take over everything.'" "Did she say what Oak Ridge is?" Martha asked, voice calm despite the thundering in her ears. Emma nodded slowly. "It's a place where old people live, a big one, with nurses and locked doors. Mommy said she won't even know what's happening after a few weeks there." For a moment, the world fell away. The laughter from the party became distant static. The scent of grilled meat disappeared. All Martha could hear was her granddaughter's small, steady voice, repeating words that sliced deeper than any betrayal ever had. "Are you mad at me for listening?" Emma asked softly, eyes wide. "No, sweetheart," Martha said, straightening, her voice even. "No, you were brave to tell me." Emma looked down. "They said you'd be happier there, but I don't think that's true." Martha crouched again to meet her eyes. "You did the right thing. You always tell me the truth, and that means everything." "I didn't tell anyone else," Emma whispered. "I was scared." Martha hugged her tightly. "You're not alone, and neither am I." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by tomato plants and budding marigolds. "Let's go back," Martha finally said, placing a kiss on Emma's forehead, "before someone comes looking for us." Back at the party, the atmosphere remained festive. Samantha was at the buffet table laughing too loudly. Ethan was chatting with a neighbor. No one noticed their absence. No one suspected. Martha walked back with her arm gently resting on Emma's shoulder. She wore the same pleasant expression, but something in her eyes had shifted. She was no longer simply present. She was studying, observing, calculating. She saw the way Samantha kept glancing toward the patio door, checking perhaps to see if Martha had returned. She saw Ethan's smile tighten when he noticed them walking together, as if unsure how much had just transpired. Martha returned to her seat and accepted a slice of cake with a warm thank you. She complimented the decorations. She laughed politely at a neighbor's story. But she was no longer celebrating. She was planning. Planning like the businesswoman she once was. planning like the caregiver who'd managed medical appointments, mortgages, and finances for 40 years. Planning like a mother who'd seen more than her children ever realized. They thought she was declining. They thought they could distract her with lemonade and fake smiles, push papers under her hand and make her disappear behind the walls of a facility with framed inspirational quotes and over-medicated residents. They'd forgotten she wasn't just a mother. She was a builder. And they'd made the mistake of attacking her while she was still strong. After the cake and presents, as guests began gathering coats and children for goodbyes, Emma sat beside her grandmother once more. They didn't speak, but held hands under the table. As the sun dipped behind the roofline, casting long shadows across the lawn, Martha leaned close and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me, Emma." The little girl squeezed her hand. "I'm not going anywhere," Martha continued. "I'm not weak, not yet, and certainly not enough to forget what they tried to do." Emma nodded slowly. Martha smiled gently and added, her voice as light as air, "I'm still stronger than they think. And now, sweetheart, I know exactly what to do." The house greeted Martha with silence as she stepped inside, shutting the door softly behind her. Gone were the echoes of party chatter and forced laughter. All that remained now was the low hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the antique wall clock her husband once loved. She didn't bother removing her shoes. Instead, she went straight to the hallway closet and pulled out the worn black filing box she hadn't touched in over a year. Inside it, beneath layers of neatly labeled folders, lay her history, not of photographs and keepsakes, but of numbers, receipts, bank transfers, cashed checks, notes scrawled in her own handwriting. It was all there, just as she remembered. She laid them out on the dining room table with the precision of a woman who once managed her husband's entire contracting business during his final years of illness. She hadn't lost those skills. They'd just been gathering dust. As the stack grew, so did her rage. Each transaction told a story. A $3,000 check when Ethan's car broke down. Another $5,500 to help with their emergency roof repair. Monthly payments toward Emma's school tuition. $700, then $800, then more as tuition increased. Grocery money wired twice a month. Medical bill reimbursements for a procedure Samantha forgot to send to insurance. And on and on and on. By the time she tallied it all up, methodically with a notepad and calculator, the number blinked back at her in cruel swank. $85,780, 74 5 years. That's how much she'd given them, unasked and unreciprocated. 5 years of quiet withdrawals from her retirement account. 5 years of Ethan saying, just until things level out. 5 years of Samantha flashing grateful smiles she didn't mean. Her hands trembled, not from age, but from restraint. And then she saw it. A single envelope buried beneath last year's tax documents. The logo of First Trust Bank printed at the top, addressed to Martha E. Collins. She almost missed it. It looked like a generic statement, but the date caught her eye. Just 3 weeks ago. She slid it open and scanned the contents. Her breath caught. A home equity loan. For $40,000 taken out in her name. The signature line held her name, but not her handwriting. It was close. Close enough to fool a teller who'd never seen the real thing, but not close enough to fool her. "Samantha," she whispered, eyes narrowing. Of course. Samantha, who once boasted about forging a college roommate's ID to get into a club. Samantha, who insisted on helping with the bills and suggested switching banks for better rates. Martha's eyes scanned the loan terms. The repayment plan had already started. The first installment had been withdrawn automatically from her checking account, hidden beneath her regular utility payments. She hadn't even noticed. They were counting on that. She sat back in her chair, stunned. This wasn't just betrayal. This was fraud. And Samantha hadn't even bothered to hide it well. That meant she was confident. That meant Ethan was either willfully blind or complicit. Probably both. They didn't think she'd find out. They didn't think she could fight back. They thought she was already gone. But they were wrong. She pulled out her cell phone. Not the house phone that Ethan had access to when he helped set up her voicemail years ago, but the prepaid one she kept in her bedroom drawer, the one she used only for emergencies. This was one. She scrolled until she found the name. Richard Dempsey, her late husband Tom's lawyer, retired technically, but the kind of man who couldn't resist a case that stank of injustice. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Martha," he said, his deep voice instantly familiar. "Been a long time." "Too long," she replied, her voice steady. "I need your help. It's sensitive." There was a pause. "Is this about Ethan?" Her silence answered the question. "I'll meet you," he said without hesitation. "Not at the office. Coffee shop on Lexington and 3rd tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Bring anything you have." "Thank you, Richard. You sound stronger than I expected." She almost smiled. "That's because I am." She hung up and turned off the phone. Then she gathered the bank documents, the receipts, the forged signature, and slipped them into a manila envelope. She returned the rest of the files to the box, locking it and tucking it back into the closet. As she walked back into her living room, she caught her reflection in the mirror above the fireplace. Hair silver, eyes sharp, back straight. They wanted her to believe she was frail. They wanted the world to believe it too. But tomorrow, she'd remind them, and the law, just how dangerous it was to underestimate a woman who had nothing left to lose. By Monday morning, Martha had begun to implement her plan. She shuffled around the kitchen wearing slippers that didn't match and stared into the refrigerator as if trying to remember why she'd opened it. When Ethan stopped by, she greeted him twice, once at the door and again 5 minutes later in the living room, pretending she hadn't seen him arrive. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked gently, concern laced with subtle satisfaction. "Oh," she replied with a faint, distant smile. "I was just thinking I'd left the oven on, but no, or maybe I did?" He glanced toward the perfectly quiet oven and said nothing. By Wednesday, she let him catch her searching for her purse inside the dishwasher. "I thought it was the cabinet," she said with a helpless shrug. "Silly me." Ethan nodded slowly. "You've seemed a little forgetful lately, Mom. Maybe we should schedule a checkup, just for peace of mind." "Peace of mind," Martha repeated, her voice neutral. She knew this moment would come, that her act, performed with delicate precision, would feed their narrative. They wanted her confused, vulnerable, suggestible, the kind of elderly parent courts labeled incompetent. She simply gave them what they wanted until it was time to strike. By Friday, Ethan was ready. He arrived at 8 a.m. with 2 coffees, overly cheerful. "Guess what? I made an appointment for you, Mom, neurology specialist, really respected. Just a quick check-in, memory tests and such." "How thoughtful," she said, eyes twinkling behind her glasses. The waiting room was sterile and bright, with motivational posters about healthy aging and brochures titled "Caring for Parents with Cognitive Decline." Ethan filled out her paperwork for her, glancing at her occasionally to confirm simple details like her birth date, her phone number. She answered incorrectly twice, on purpose. The nurse called her name and Ethan accompanied her into the office. The neurologist was a thin man in his early 50s, with wire-frame glasses and a smile too polished to be sincere. "Mrs. Collins," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Dr. Keller. Let's run through a few standard cognitive checks today, just routine." Martha smiled politely. "Of course." As they walked to the small examination room, she made a point of looking back at Ethan. "Don't wander off, dear," she said, voice soft. "I might forget where you are." He grinned. "I'll be right here, Mom." Behind the closed door, the doctor's tone changed. "I understand your family is concerned." Dr. Keller began, scanning the clipboard. "Some recent memory issues?" Martha folded her hands, her face calm. "So they say." "Let's start with a few exercises. Repeat these 5 words after me, Apple, penny, tablespoon, car. She repeated them without hesitation. Now I'll ask again in a few minutes, he said, jotting something down. Over the next 20 minutes, he guided her through basic cognitive tests, counting backwards from 100 by sevens, drawing a clock, naming animals. She deliberately made 2 small errors, hesitated once mid-sentence, and blinked as if trying to find the right word. He nodded thoughtfully, expression unreadable. I think it would be wise, he finally said, to run a few more detailed scans. Nothing urgent. But mild cognitive impairment is common at your age, and early detection helps with planning. Martha leaned forward, meeting his gaze. Planning, doctor? Power of attorney? Financial safeguards, housing adjustments, that sort of thing? She smiled, warm but firm. Would those adjustments include something like Oak Ridge assisted living? He froze for just a beat too long. She continued, her voice now sharp as a blade hidden in velvet. Tell me, Dr. Keller, how long have you known Samantha? His smile wavered. I ask, she said, because I suspect you've already been briefed, possibly compensated, certainly guided to provide just enough concern to justify legal action. He cleared his throat. Mrs. Collins, I assure you, no need to assure me, she interrupted, reaching into her pocket. You can explain yourself to my attorney. She unfolded a simple cotton handkerchief from her lap and revealed a tiny recording device sewn into the corner, red light blinking. It's been running since we entered the room, she said calmly. His face went pale. I may forget where I put my purse, she said softly, but I don't forget who I am. She stood. You'll be hearing from Richard Dempsey. He's very particular about licensed professionals committing medical fraud. Martha opened the door and stepped out, her spine straight, her expression placid. Ethan stood quickly. Everything okay, Mom? Oh, lovely, she said. The doctor's so gentle. He said I might be a bit forgetful, but who isn't? He forced a smile. Yeah, good. That's good. They walked back to the car. Martha hummed softly, eyes on the sky. When Ethan opened the passenger door for her, she turned to him and smiled. Thank you for caring so much. You've been so attentive lately. Makes me feel loved. Ethan blinked, taken aback. Of course, Mom. Inside the car, she rested her hands calmly in her lap. Outside, the world rolled past, the town, the trees, the lives of others who would never know the battle that had just begun. But Martha knew, and now she had a weapon. Because when a predator thinks they've cornered prey, they never expect the prey to bare teeth. She smiled out the window, her eyes steady. Let them believe the trap was closing. Let them believe they had already won. It made the sting of their defeat all the sweeter. The next morning, Martha greeted Ethan and Samantha at her front door with a warm, though measured smile. She stood on the porch, framed by the soft glow of early daylight, looking as frail and confused as she could manage. Morning, Mom, Ethan said, voice gentle but bright. Samantha followed with a reassuring nod, clutching a leather-bound folder labeled Financial Authorization and Care Documents. Hello, dear, Martha murmured, voice soft and tone a touch unsteady. It's nice to see you both, but did I dream that message from the bank? What was that about paperwork? Samantha stepped forward, glancing at Ethan before speaking. Mom, we're really worried about you. That memory test last week, it was just to check things, but the doctor recommended we look into future planning. For your safety, for peace of mind. Ethan smiled at her with such affection that Martha suppressed a smirk. Yes, honey, she replied, allowing her voice to quiver slightly. Aging can be tricky, but I always thought you'd help me figure things out. Absolutely, Samantha said quickly, which is why we brought these documents. If you sign, you approve us to handle banking, bills, healthcare choices, just to help out. Still holding the folder, Samantha pulled out a pen and placed it gently in Martha's hand. We wouldn't be here if we weren't sure this is best for you, Mom. Martha cocked her head to the side, peering at the pen. Then she looked up at Ethan. So, once I sign, you'll pay my bills? Use my card if needed? Ethan and Samantha exchanged a relieved glance. Yes, exactly, Ethan replied. "You'd still have access to everything. You're in control. We just help manage it so you don't have to worry." "Wonderful," Martha said, voice soft. She closed her eyes briefly. "What about my car? Who will drive me to the doctor next month?" "I'll always be there," Ethan said. Tears pricked at Martha's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "Okay." She handed back the pen. "Let's do it tomorrow. I can't think straight today. I keep forgetting where I put my phone." They paused, relief flooding their features. "That's a great idea," Samantha said, returning the folder to the briefcase. "It'll be done properly, with a notary." "Yes," Ethan added, "with a professional present. We want this done right." Martha nodded slowly as she closed the door, watching them leave with calculated innocence. In her mind, one piece of the plan dropped neatly into place. They thought they had her. They believed she was already falling apart. They were wrong. She closed the door and walked toward the living room, where she perched on her couch and lifted her hands in gratitude. "Thank you, Father," she whispered, breath steady. Despite their apparent warmth, doubt raged beneath the surface. She poured a glass of water from the kitchen and came back to stare at the closed briefcase by her front door. Inside were those documents: power of attorney forms, guardianship papers, assignment of financial control, you name it, all worded to give them full authority, masked in what they claimed was concern. She touched the folded flap of the paper through the leather, smelled it, felt the ink on her fingers. Their names were on every clause. Power to manage my property, power to make healthcare decisions. She closed her eyes, visualizing what would happen next. Moving her to Oak Ridge, shifting her bank account, using her savings to buy Samantha a new car, control her house, maybe even change the lock on her front door. Tears came unbidden, but she did not cry. Instead, she rose and walked down the hallway toward her bedroom. Behind her, the house hummed with afternoon light, concealing nothing. She opened a drawer and pulled out her prepaid phone, an old book on elder justice, and a small leather-bound notebook. She sat on her bed and spread everything in front of her like a general, planning the next battle. They were ordering checkmate. But she would not be cornered without a fight. As late afternoon arrived, her next move materialized. She called Richard Dempsey, who had offered to come by. He arrived just as the dusk light turned amber through her living room windows. He held her documents, and they reviewed them carefully. Martha explained her concerns: the forged signature, the bank loan, the doctor's betrayal. Richard nodded slowly. "This is significant," he said softly. Martha looked into his eyes. "They want immediate access. They thought if I signed them, thinking I was senile, no one would question it. They underestimated me." Richard leaned back. "We'll handle it. First," he said, "we need witnesses, medical, legal, unbiased. And we'll demand that Samantha and Ethan come with any documents and sign in front of a notary and us. Second, we need to secure your accounts. Bank, home equity lines, online accounts. Third, we'll draft temporary restraining orders, nothing confrontational, just protections in place. You don't sign until everything is verified." Martha nodded, her breath firm. He added, "You also have that taped conversation from Dr. Keller. Plus, we can subpoena that bank application." Terror flickered in her chest, but she leaned into it. Good. Richard marked the timeline in her notebook. Meeting with notary tomorrow, contacting bank Monday, meeting squarely with Samantha and Ethan after due process. He also suggested Molly James as a financial planner with ethics, someone Samantha would not trust, but who would safeguard Martha's interests. That evening, Martha called Molly James. Molly answered on the first ring. "Martha," she said, surprise in her voice, "I was just thinking of you." "I need a favor," Martha said quietly. "Would you come by tomorrow afternoon?" "Of course. I'll clear my schedule." When Molly arrived, Martha showed her the folder. Molly frowned. "This is textbook elder exploitation. They're grooming you to sign and then take everything." "They think I'm done," Martha said softly, "but I haven't lost my mind. I'm just strategizing." Molly squeezed her hand. "We'll stop it before it's done." That night, Martha sat in her garden, under the glow of lanterns hanging from the oak tree. She felt something she hadn't in years. Peace. Not peace in ignorance. Peace and clarity. The checks had been written, the documents delivered, the unseen pieces had been placed. They were planning to trap her. She was planning to survive. Tomorrow, they would come for her signature. But she would now meet them at the table, on her terms. Her pawns were in position. Her rook and bishop bank statements lay ready. Her knight, Emma's trust, stood protected. And when the final move came, it would be checkmate. Martha stood in the soft light of her kitchen the next morning, her hands steady as she dialed the first of 3 numbers. The first call was to Richard Dempsey, her lawyer. 10 sharp, she said. Bring someone who can notarize, and I'll need your discretion. This isn't just legal, it's performative. I understand, he replied calmly. You've always played the long game, Martha. The second call went to Linda Farrell, a local reporter with whom Martha had worked during her community advocacy years. Linda had a talent for uncovering quiet crimes, especially those dressed in smiles and family photos. I need your help, Martha said. Are we talking front page help or courtroom transcript? Linda asked. Maybe both. 10 minutes later, Linda agreed to pose as a notary's assistant with a fountain pen that was more than just a pen. Hidden inside was a discreet, high-definition camera. Linda would record the entire interaction, her presence masked as a silent observer. The third call went to Emma's school. Yes, this is Martha Collins. I'd like to pick up my granddaughter early today. Family event. I already cleared it with her parents. It was a lie, of course, but a soft one. One made for a child's protection. Not her exploitation. Emma arrived just before 9:45 a.m., clutching her backpack and a sketchbook. Grandma? She asked, curious. What's the surprise? Martha bent down to meet her eyes. Today, she said gently, you'll see what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it's your own family. Emma blinked but nodded, sensing the weight behind her grandmother's words. By 10:02 a.m., the room was staged. Martha's dining room was pristine. The documents were laid out neatly on the polished table, next to glasses of water and a plate of shortbread cookies. Richard sat at one end, calm and collected. Linda, in a navy blazer and conservative bun, sat quietly beside him, her pen clipped to a legal pad. Emma sat on the armchair in the corner, legs swinging, watching everyone carefully. Then the doorbell rang. Ethan and Samantha entered with beaming, almost rehearsed smiles. Samantha wore her usual business-casual sharpness, and Ethan carried a folder matching the one they'd brought earlier. "Mom, you look great today," Samantha said, voice artificially bright. Ethan gestured toward the documents. "We're so glad you're doing this. It'll just make everything easier." Martha nodded serenely. "Of course. I want everything to be smooth. That's why I invited Richard. And his assistant here, Ms. Hall." Linda gave a modest nod. "Just here to witness and notarize. Nothing official without full awareness." Samantha's eyes flickered briefly toward Linda, but she smiled and said nothing. "Let's begin," Richard said, placing the documents in front of Martha. As Ethan explained the clauses aloud, "This allows us to help with bills. You'll never be alone in your decisions." Martha feigned forgetfulness once more. "Oh dear, is this the same as that bank loan thing we signed, or different?" Samantha's smile tightened. "No, Mom. This is just for your own protection." Emma frowned slightly from the corner. "And this means you'll handle my doctor's visits too?" Martha asked innocently. "That's a relief. I forget what those pills are even for." Ethan nodded, visibly encouraged. "We'll take care of all of it." Linda quietly adjusted her pen, the camera now angled squarely at Samantha's face. Martha reached for the document but stopped just before her pen touched the paper. "Oh," she said sweetly, "and before I sign, can we talk about that home equity loan you two took out in my name?" The room fell still. "What?" Samantha blinked. "What are you talking about?" "The one from First Trust Bank," Martha replied, now sitting straighter. "The one with the forged signature, quite convincing, but not mine." Ethan's jaw dropped. Samantha recovered first. That was That must have been a clerical mix-up. We'd never... Linda clicked her pen. Martha leaned forward, eyes sharp now. You want power of attorney? You want guardianship? You bring forged documents, manipulated doctors, and treat me like I'm fading. She turned slightly toward Emma. And you do it while your daughter watches. Emma clutched her sketchbook tightly, eyes wide. Samantha tried to regroup. We only wanted to protect you. You've been confused lately. I've been pretending, Martha said firmly, and now you've walked into your own trap. She glanced at Linda. How long have we been recording? Since the moment they stepped in, Linda replied calmly. Samantha paled. Recording? You can't do that without consent. It's my house, Martha replied coldly, and I consented. She stood slowly with grace but power. This, she pointed at the documents, isn't a gift. It's theft wrapped in sentiment. Richard opened his folder and began removing counter documents. A cease and desist, financial restrictions, and a formal complaint for fraudulent activity with the bank. You'll find, he said smoothly, that Martha's quite lucid, quite competent, and very well advised. Ethan sank into his chair. Samantha's eyes darted to the door. Martha turned to Emma, voice soft again. Sometimes, she said, you have to let people show you who they really are. Emma nodded, lips pressed tight. As Ethan stood slowly, defeated, Martha offered one final smile to Samantha. Tomorrow, she said lightly, I'll be the confused old lady you were hoping for, if I decide it suits me. It was just before 10 when Ethan's silver SUV pulled into Martha's driveway. He stepped out in a navy blazer he never wore outside work and adjusted his collar as Samantha smoothed her sleek bun and clutched the same folder, now slightly more worn, as if it contained the keys to the kingdom. They were practically radiant with anticipation. Morning, Mom, Ethan beamed. You look great today. Oh, Martha said with a subtle tremble in her voice. You always say such sweet things. What day is it again? Thursday, isn't it? Samantha stepped forward briskly. It's Friday, actually. But that's okay. We're here to help you get through this. Oh, thank heavens, Martha whispered. I'd be lost without you two. I feel so foggy these days. Inside, everything looked prepared, exactly as the couple had envisioned. The legal papers spread out neatly across the polished dining table, a pair of pens aligned precisely, and the soft clink of a tea kettle humming from the kitchen. Linda, still in her role as notary assistant, stood at the far end of the room. Richard sat calmly beside her, flipping through official-looking documents. Shall we begin? Richard asked. Samantha nodded quickly. Yes, we just need a signature on the main form. It's the durable power of attorney. We've walked her through it before. Ethan placed the folder in front of Martha, his hands visibly eager. Martha blinked and looked around slowly as if dazed. So, this means you'll pay my bills? Use my money when I forget? That's right, Ethan said gently. And it'll give us permission to make decisions if you're ever too confused. Linda cleared her throat, lifting a compact recording device. Per standard notarial procedures, we'll begin video documentation now. This recording is for legal transparency. Samantha flinched slightly, but offered a strained smile. Of course, she said. That's perfectly fine. Martha reached out, her fingers shaking slightly as she took the first document. This is the thing I signed to give you my house? No, Ethan corrected quickly. It just lets us manage things on your behalf. You still own everything. Until I don't, Martha said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. She held the pen, hovered above the signature line. Then she paused. A long silence filled the room. She slowly looked up. Her eyes, so recently fogged with feigned confusion, were suddenly clear, sharp, calm. You know, she said clearly, setting the pen down, I've always been a terrible actress. But it turns out I'm getting better with age. The room went still. Richard folded his hands in his lap, expression unreadable. Linda's eyes flicked to the pen camera already recording. Martha turned to the first page of the form, tapped it with her index finger. "This clause," she said, voice rising, "grants irrevocable financial access to all liquid assets effective immediately. That's not what you said this was for, Ethan." Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Martha flipped to the next page. "And this one authorizes you to sell my property without notifying me. That includes this house. And my name's not even printed properly on the witness line. That's a clerical error, isn't it, Samantha?" Samantha's face had gone white. There must be a mix-up from the legal team. You didn't draft this, Samantha?" Martha said sweetly. "Because I've already sent copies of this form to Richard here, and he compared them to the bank application filed 2 weeks ago. Also in my name. Also with your handwriting." Linda clicked her pen gently. Martha continued, now firm. "You forged my signature on a loan. You coached a doctor into diagnosing me as impaired. And you rehearsed my responses at this table, assuming I'd be too tired or too confused to understand." She picked up the pen, not to sign, but to point directly at Ethan. "You knew this was happening. You didn't stop it. You watched her steal from your mother." "Mom," Ethan whispered, "you don't understand." "I understand completely," she said. "What I don't understand is how I raised a son who would let this happen." Samantha stood suddenly. "This is entrapment. You can't legally—" "Sit down," Richard said, voice like ice. "You are currently being recorded in the process of attempting to obtain unlawful control over a senior citizen's assets. That pen over there is a live recording device. We have everything." Samantha stared, her knees locking. "You tricked us?" Ethan asked, voice high with disbelief. "No," Martha said, rising from her chair. "You tricked yourselves. You saw what you wanted to see, a confused old woman with no fight left in her. But I've spent a lifetime surviving harder battles than this." Her eyes softened as she looked toward Emma, who had silently appeared at the stairwell. "And I've got something more important than money to protect." Emma stepped forward, face pale, but her eyes locked on her grandmother's. "I believe you," she said quietly. Martha nodded. "Then watch closely, sweetheart. This is how you unmask betrayal." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stood frozen, eyes wide and glassy, while Samantha's jaw clenched so tightly it looked like her teeth might crack. Martha reached into a side drawer and pulled out a small velvet pouch. She opened it carefully, revealing a tiny digital recorder, worn, old, but effective. She placed it gently on the table beside the stack of documents. "This," she said, "was in my handkerchief at Dr. Keller's office. It recorded everything. Your attempt to have me declared mentally incompetent, the subtle suggestion that I was slipping and in need of managed care." She clicked the device. The tinny recording crackled to life. "If we frame it as early stage, the court will expedite the guardianship," Samantha's voice said, clear as glass. "She won't even realize what's happening." Ethan's voice followed, timid, trembling. Ethan's face crumpled. Samantha's eyes darted to the pen Linda still held. "Oh, and that's not all," Martha continued, voice rising with clarity and force. "Here," she opened another folder, this one filled with printed statements and account activity, "are the records of money quietly moved from my savings into an investment fund under Samantha's name." She turned to Samantha. "The fund you created last year, quietly, monthly. I didn't notice the first transfers, but after April, I started watching." Richard slid the documents toward himself, examining the transaction logs. "This is enough for a full financial fraud investigation." Samantha took a step back. "You're trying to frame me. This is a setup." "No, Samantha," Linda said calmly, pulling a badge from her inner jacket pocket. "This is reporting. I'm with the Herald Sentinel, and everything that's happened here today has been documented, audio, video, and written. If we wanted to publish a piece on elder financial abuse in upper-middle-class households, you'd be the headline." Samantha staggered. "You tricked us. You all set this up." Linda shrugged. "We didn't create the story. We just let it unfold." Ethan sat back down heavily, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook silently. "Ethan," Martha's voice softened, but not enough to forgive. "You let her manipulate you. You let her plan this and you followed like a child, my child." "I didn't know how to stop it," Ethan mumbled, barely audible. "She said it was for your safety, that we needed the money. I thought it would help everyone." "It helped you feel powerful," Martha said sharply, "at the expense of my dignity." Samantha exploded. "You think we're monsters? We raised your granddaughter while you played widow in your big house. You gave us just enough to survive and called it generosity. You didn't survive, you leeched," Martha replied coldly. Samantha's hands curled into fists. "We had no choice." "There's always a choice," Martha interrupted. "You chose deception, and now you'll face the consequences." Linda carefully slid a release form across the table. "Just so you're aware, all footage taken today is protected under journalistic investigation privilege. If you pursue any legal retaliation, you open the door to full criminal discovery. You can walk away quietly now, or we go public." Samantha stared at the paper, then at Martha, then at the pen camera. She said nothing, only breathed, sharp, uneven. Ethan finally looked up, red-eyed and broken. "What happens now?" Martha didn't answer immediately. She walked toward the bay window where Emma stood watching everything unfold like a courtroom drama too real to be fiction. Martha reached down, took her hand gently. "Now," she said, turning back to the room, "I decide who deserves to be my family." She returned to the table, stood straight, and met their eyes. "I used to think family was automatic, that blood determined loyalty, that love, once given, would always return. But love without respect is just control, and blood doesn't excuse betrayal." Samantha looked away, her expression unreadable. Ethan stared at the table, defeated. "I was the weak woman you thought you could manipulate," Martha continued, "but weakness is a choice. And today, I choose strength." She looked to Richard. "Everything changes today, the will, the trust, the protections." Then she turned to Ethan, voice trembling not from fear but from conviction. "You don't get to define me anymore. You don't get to decide where I live, what I own, or who I trust." Emma let go of her grandmother's hand and walked to Ethan's side. She placed a hand on his arm, small and cautious. "Dad," she said, voice soft, "you need to fix this." Ethan nodded once, slow, ashamed. Samantha turned sharply on her heel, storming toward the front door. Martha didn't stop her. Some people walk out when truth is revealed. Others break, but some, like Martha, rise. She stood at the center of her storm and remained unshaken. The morning after the storm felt oddly peaceful. In her garden, sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled patterns across her rose bushes. Martha Collins stood barefoot on the dewy grass, inhaling the scent of new blooms. For the first time in weeks, her chest felt light. She had work to do. Inside, she opened the large envelope she'd received from Richard Dempsey the night before. Inside was the newly drafted will and trust documents, meticulously prepared. A scholarship fund for Emma, accessible only when she turned 21, to cover education, university, trade school, anything Emma chose. A clause irrevocably restricting access to Martha's assets by Ethan and Samantha, unless specific. Transparent conditions were met that required counseling evidence and verified rehabilitation efforts. The power of attorney authority was transferred to a neutral, independent fiduciary, a certified elder care trustee, not related to Martha, with strict oversight. Tears sprang to Martha's eyes, not of sorrow, but of clarity. She signed, her signature crisp and deliberate. Every stroke of the pen was a statement. This was her estate, her life's work, and she now chose its beneficiaries carefully. One section removed Ethan entirely from inheritance rights. No access to property, no rights to bank accounts, no ability to influence Emma's corpus. In his place, a charitable gift fund benefiting local youth programs was named. In Samantha's name, a plaque recognizing latent accountability and restitution would evoke memory without control. Martha didn't gloat. She simply acted, quietly, legally, unmovably. Her act of strength contained no fanfare. She didn't post declarations online. She didn't call local television. She just sent the documents, the will, the trust, the legal instructions, via certified mail to her attorney, to the bank trustee, and to the elder care fiduciary. Ethan and Samantha would receive their own notices, a formal change to the estate plan and legal protections. There might even be cease and desist correspondence ahead. But Martha slept soundly afterward. Mid-morning, the doorbell rang. She answered to find Richard at the doorstep, his expression earnest. "All done?" he asked quietly. "With pen and purpose." She smiled. He handed her a small package from Molly James, the financial planner. Inside were spreadsheets reorganizing her assets, moving certain holdings into trust, freezing the home equity credit line, changing passwords, closing redundant accounts. Martha nodded. "My defenses are in place." "What about Emma?" he asked. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded letter, delivered that morning in a plain envelope addressed in a child's handwriting. "Grandma, I'm sorry if I got anyone in trouble. I only wanted you to be safe. Mommy said she's sorry too. Daddy says he never meant to hurt you. Can I visit soon? I miss you. Love, Emma." Martha's hands trembled. That letter wasn't just a message. It was an olive branch, small and tentative, but sincere. She stepped outside into her garden and sat down on a stone bench under the oak tree. Emma's letter in her hand, she breathed deep. "The real inheritance is trust," Martha whispered to the sky. She replayed Emma's shaky handwriting in her mind. This child had risked everything to tell the truth. This child deserved everything in return. That afternoon, she penned a reply, encouraging, warm, protective. She invited Emma to come spend the day with her, just the two of them, to plan architecture books and college dreams, to talk about being brave. Later, as the sun dipped low, Martha stood at her bay window in the living room. She watched the first blooms of spring turning to full color. Behind her, the house felt full of presence, not empty, because she had reclaimed it. She recalled the old Martha, the one who never asked, who gave too much, who let others define her worth. That Martha was gone. In her place stood someone tempered by betrayals, but anchored in conviction. Across town, Ethan sat at his own kitchen table, the letter from the trustee notification in front of him. He stared at the changes, exclusion clauses, legal oversight, scholarship assignment. He realized he would never access the money because of what he and Samantha had done. He sank low in his chair and wept. Samantha paced, her voice quiet. "He would have had everything. We could have had everything," she repeated in broken echoes to no one. But Martha didn't care. She didn't need closure. She needed truth and peace. Emma arrived the next weekend. She walked into Martha's kitchen with a backpack full of drawings and college brochures. They baked cookies, talked architecture and animals, laughed over shared stories. When Emma pulled out her letter and read Martha's reply, her eyes shone. Martha pulled her into a hug. "Your inheritance is more than money," she said. "It's knowing you told the truth, that Grandma believes in you and will always protect you." Emma nodded, a small, tight nod, then looked out the window. "I'm starting a savings jar," she said, "for college." Martha smiled. "Let's add to it together." She knelt down and held Emma's hand. They looked at the garden, full of blooms ready for summer. Martha felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a quiet joy, not triumphant, not loud, just steady. She had risen not from revenge, but from resolve. And in that resolve, she had found rebirth. The next morning, light crept through the curtain, painting golden lines across the carpet. Emma tiptoed into Martha's room, clutching a small gift bag. Martha stirred awake, blinking sleep from her eyes, and when she saw her granddaughter, she smiled gently. "Good morning, sweetheart," she whispered, extending her hand. Emma hesitated, then placed something in Martha's hand, a lacquered fountain pen, dark blue with silver trim. Martha's breath caught. She knew that pen. Her late husband, Tom, had bought it for her on their wedding anniversary. She hadn't held it in years, too precious to risk losing. but Emma had found it in Martha's old writing table and brought it. "It's Grandma's?" Emma asked softly. Martha turned it over, the nib glinting in the light. She looked at her granddaughter with tears halting behind her eyes. "Yes," she said slowly. "It belonged to Mommy's daddy, my husband, Ellen's father. He gave it to me when we promised to write our story together. Now, I want you to have it." Emma's eyes widened and Martha continued, "I want you to have it because you're not just writing words, you're writing justice, a story that matters, a truth that can change things." Emma's voice trembled. I don't know much yet." Martha placed her hand over Emma's. "Then learn, write. If you can bring justice through your pen, I'll know that love, real love, survived everything." They hugged, and Emma leaned her head into Martha's shoulder. Later that day, they walked through the garden where early summer blooms had burst into life. The roses were in full bloom, petals unfolding like whispers of red and pink. Bees buzzed lazily between lavender and marigold, and butterflies dipped across the path. Martha sat on the stone bench under the oak, the pen resting on her palm. Emma plopped beside her, sketchbook open on her lap. They were quiet for a long time, no words needed, just presence and peace. Then Emma turned her sketchbook around to show Martha a drawing. The two of them under an arch of flowers, hands joined, faces bright. Martha traced the lines softly. "This is beautiful," she said. Emma reached out. "Grandma, thank you for everything." Martha shook her head, her silver hair catching sunlight. "It's time people knew what love isn't and what it should be," she said. She held the pen to her temple, like a scepter. "But the real power is in using it wisely." Glancing at Emma, she added, "Promise me you'll use it to write good." Emma nodded. They sat side by side in silence as the sun arced across the sky. Martha's heart hummed with something she hadn't felt in years, lightness, courage, and a steady rhythm of purpose. As afternoon deepened, visitors came. Richard, the lawyer, brought copies of finalized documents. Molly James delivered updated financial statements. All was in order. Martha's home equity line was frozen, her trust setup complete. But Martha barely noticed. Instead, she returned to the garden bench with Emma. They watched the blooms sway in the breeze. "I feel free," Emma said eventually, touching Martha's arm gently. Martha nodded. "That's because you are, and because you helped me remember what I lost, my voice, my purpose." Emma closed her eyes. "I'm really sorry about what happened. I didn't know how to help more." "You helped enough," Martha said, stroking her granddaughter's hair. "You opened the door to the truth." Emma looked up. "Mommy says she'll work harder. Daddy, he cried." Martha's smile was gentle. "You know what happens next." Emma nodded. "You'll be Grandma again. And you'll be granddaughter." She paused, taking in the scent of roses, the hunger of light, the innocence that still believed in love and justice. When the shadows stretched long and evening came, Martha held Emma in her lap. "You know," she said softly, "there was a time I thought my life was measured by how much I gave, by how many I helped." Emma looked up, curious. "I spent years believing that love is sacrifice, that giving back everything is enough. But it wasn't always true." She reached into her pocket and clutched the pen. "From now on, I live for me, but also for the truth, for the story that still needs telling, mixed in with the lessons I've learned and the ones you will start learning." Tears filled Emma's eyes. She nodded. Martha lowered her voice, concluding their moment. "Because the life I built, the love I gave, it wasn't meant to be erased. It was meant to stand. And you, my dear, are the first person who truly saw me." She brushed her fingers across Emma's cheek, then pressed the nib of the pen to her forehead. "For you," she whispered. As dusk fell, the roses' colors deepened to shadows. The garden seemed to exhale. Martha sat back, gaze soft but unwavering. Her hair glistened silver in the fading light. In the quiet of the garden, she felt reborn, not defined by loss, not weighed by shame, not hollowed by silence. Instead, she felt anchored by justice. And then she thought, all my life I sacrificed for them. Now I live for myself and for that little girl, the first person who truly listened to me. In that soft moment, she realized she had risen from betrayal and erasure to become the woman she'd always been. Guardian, storyteller, survivor, and she was no longer invisible. She was home.